Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to do another series in our Is the Book Better? Except this one's a little different because it's not necessarily a novel or a short story, but it's more of a graphic novel. And mainly it's because this story and this artist has had a big influence on me, and I didn't even really know like who the artist was until recently or something. It's kind of a crazy convoluted story. But the story is the story of Neverwhere by Richard Corben. Richard Corben's really more of an artist than a novelist. But I think the story is really interesting, and so that's why we're going to talk about it today. And also what spurred it on is Richard Corben died, I believe, in early December of 2020. And at 80 years old or something, and so I had wanted to talk about him for a while, and I thought this would be a good venue because chances are you are probably familiar with his work as well, even if you didn't know exactly who he is. This one is a little different because Neverwhere actually originally started as an animation. I think he did it back in 1968. I was born in 1969, so this is pretty old. And he worked at like a little animation studio. He had this idea for a story, and then like in his off time, he just started making this illustration. And the video is only like 15 minutes long, and I'll put a link in the description so you can actually watch it. I believe it's just out of copyright, so there's no big deal about that. And what was interesting is like when he started working on it, some of his coworkers and his boss found out about it, and they all started to help him. That went from this guy's little, labor of love, so to speak, that he was just doing on his own, and became something that more and more people got interested in, and so it kind of came from there. Years later, he started making comics for, I think it's called Metal Hurlant, which was a French magazine. I think it means heavy metal, and then it got exported over to the States, which became Heavy Metal Magazine that we know today. It just put out like its 300th issue just a few months ago. So it's been going since I was in elementary school, actually a little bit before, probably when I started preschool or something. So it's been around for a while. And he was one of the early writers, and one of the things that he first put in there was the story of Neverwhere, except this one was much more expanded. He added more characters, and he kind of went a little more in depth into the storyline. It was a little weirder, the original video was a very interesting sort of portal science fantasy story, and then what he did for heavy metal was he basically made a series of paintings. I don't know how long it took him to do this, and they were all wrapped around the story of Den. And that's really what the core of the story is about, is this character named Den. Depending on which version you follow, and then let me follow up by saying that there is a third version, which is probably what most people are familiar with, which is the segment from Heavy Metal Movie, which also features Den. And this one, the voice over was done by John Candy, which basically just nailed the whole thing. Richard Corben really didn't like the animation that they used in the movie. He thought it was very childish and lazy and sloppy. And if you compare the animation from the movie to the animation of the original work, you can see why, he really didn't like it. And I'll post a few videos to kind of compare and contrast the two. But he loved the voiceover for John Candy, and I think he really did own that whole story. And so that's sort of the three things. It was an animated short, then it was a graphic novel serialized in Heavy Metal magazine, so it was told over periods of time. You can actually buy it's out of print. It's been out of print since the 90s or something. But I have a copy of the original, sort of where they put all the stories together of Den, and it's really cool. I was kind of glad I got it, even though it's 30 years old, something like that, almost 30 years old. So depending on the storyline, in general, the story is always about this guy who builds a device that transports him to a place called Neverwhere. Exactly how that plays out is a little differently. This is kind of building off of our Princess of Mars discussion in that video, because Richard Corben was heavily influenced by Edgar Rice Burroughs by A Princess of Mars, and so that was kind of the lead-in. In the original video, I don't think it played a part in anything else, but in the original animated short that he did back in the late 60s, it was about a geeky kid who finds some sort of schematic to build an electronic device. I think it was left by like his uncle or his grandfather or something, and then he builds it, and that teleports him to another planet, or maybe that was. Well, let's see. No, in the animated video, he follows this little sprite, this little fairy thing that leads him to shows him how to build the device, and then kind of Wizard of Oz style, it shifts from live action into the animated world. And the animation is very interesting, but it's very understated. For one thing, it was kind of like early rotoscoping. He actually used human actors to play out the different parts, and then he would sort of draw in around them. It's a very simplistic style. It basically is like, I think, black and green, or maybe the background colors change quite a bit. Very simple colors, but still a very interesting story. And while once Den is in this other world that he calls Neverwhere, he runs into these other people. Everybody's naked for some reason. Everybody's built like a porn star for some reason. I guess if you're going to draw naked people, you might as well draw really hot naked people. And then he goes on these various adventures. He has to rescue this girl. He falls in love with the girl. I believe in the animated short, he gets kicked out of Neverwhere back into the real world, but the story goes on. In the book, in the heavy metal magazine story, it's very similar, except it's way more surreal. You can tell that this is a more mature guy. He's probably maybe done some psychedelics since then, and he has a very much more wild view, but the art is way different. Richard Corben's very interesting. He will create art that is it looks like 3D modeling. It looks like something that you would create using a modern day 3D rendering type program, except he was just doing it with paint, 40 years ago or something like that, 30 years ago. And so it's really impressive at the sort of work that he did. And so if you can find, and I know there's some, you can find the online images, and I'll be posting some as I'm talking about all this. But it's really amazing art. He goes off a little more into, like I said, a little more esoteric views. And it's still a lot of hot, naked people running around, fighting beast men, that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's really good. It's basically much like the animated short, except 10 times better, 10 times deeper, 10 times better art, 10 times better story, all that sort of stuff. And then we get to the heavy metal section, the movie heavy metal section with Den of Earth. It's a little more fun. It's basically the same storyline. They had to fit it into the overarching storyline with the Lochnar, the little green orb. Interestingly, the Lochnar is the thing that they talk about in Neverwhere. That name got used from Neverwhere, the comic, and put into the movie as the little green sphere that's running around and causing all the evil and stuff. And so they kept the name, they just sort of changed what it is. But in the all the books, they're looking for, all versions, they're looking for the Lochnar. In the comic, they had to fit that in. So it's this young nerdy guy who finds the Lochnar while he's working on some sort of electronic device, which basically looks like the same electronic device from all the other iterations of Neverwhere. And lightning strikes, that teleports him and transforms him into Den and Neverwhere. And that's why there's this little joke. It's kind of an inside joke. When he first arrives, he looks down and goes, "Whoa, I'm big, real big." But he pulls like this cloth off the wall and wraps around and goes, "There's no way I'm gonna walk around with my dork hanging out." Well, in every other iteration of Neverwhere, that's exactly what Den does. He walks around with his dork hanging out. And a lot of Richard Corben work, he has a lot of just kind of casual nudity. He's not meant to be sexy. It's not meant to be vulgar or anything. It's just, he just draws naked people a lot. And so in the movie version of Den of Neverwhere, it's basically the same storyline. It's a little more simplified. It's a little more like the original animated short because they leave out a lot of the characters and stuff. And then they just kind of make it a little more jokey and funny in certain places. I kind of wonder if that was John Candy's influence, or maybe the movie decided they wanted to be a little more light and playful with this one or whatever. And so it's still really good. One of the things I think is kind of impressive with all of these iterations is there's no computers. This is not done by computers. This is done before computers were really a factor in creating animation, whether it's the Heavy Metal movie or the original animated short. And to me, it's just, even if it's, in my mind at least, even if the animation is not that great, it's still impressive to think that human beings drew every little line, every frame, every color, every aspect of what you're seeing. Some human being had to create that. This wasn't something you programmed into a computer, drag and drop, and that sort of thing. And I'm sure if you're someone who does computer animation or does this sort of CGI stuff, you're probably a little pissed because there's a lot of work involved in that. But I just think it's a very different kind of work. And so, I don't know, to me it's just very impressive. The reason why I like Richard Corben, reason why I say that he's been a bit of an influence on me, is I remember when I was a kid and my dad took me to go see the Heavy Metal movie because he had no idea what that was all about. So I'm 11 years old watching Heavy Metal. Watch the movie and kind of wrap your head around that. But I remember even the Den storyline. I just really love the idea of being teleported to another place and living there. At the time, I was really big in the Dungeons and Dragons. That was like in the early '80s, at the sort of the golden age of the D&D, if you will. And I think that just sort of fit into my whole, I want to escape from reality. I want to get away from the world and school and bullies and all the other crap of growing up, being a young kid. And Den was just another way of kind of doing that. It was just sort of like, oh, not only is it just me going to another world, it's me transforming into a hero that fits into that other world. And so I've always liked that aspect. It's sort of a trope of science fiction and fantasy, of the sort of portal thing, where a character goes through a portal into a totally different world and has to exist in that world in some sense. And it's been around for a while. I mean, actually, you could argue, what was Mark Twain's story, a Yankee in Camelot's court, or King Arthur's court, I think, something like that. And it was that notion of someone in his time period going back and living in the age of the King Arthur series. C.S. Lewis, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. The kids go through the back of a wardrobe and end up in Narnia. I'm trying to think of some other examples, but it's a very common trope, both in science fiction and in sort of fantasy, because Chronicles of Narnia is still kind of fantasy style. Star Trek has a lot of those. In a way, you can argue that every time Captain Picard got trapped on the holodeck in the 1940s noir style thing, that was kind of a portal. Here's a guy who's supposed to be in 25th century world, and he's being stuck back in the 1940s, where he has to kind of get by there. So a lot of the holodeck stuff and some teleporter stuff. They used to do that. The mirror universe that they use in Star Trek a lot, where something goes wrong with the teleporter and they end up in the world where Spock has a goatee and all that sort of stuff. So this is all sort of portal fantasy, and Den of Neverwhere is just another version of that. Except that one I think is in some ways a little more extreme because it is a character going to leaving his familiar territory, which is also familiar to us, and going into a world that is totally unfamiliar to everybody. Both the reader and the characters have no idea what's going on, and I think that's probably one of the things I like about it. It's an extra level of adventure and excitement because you don't know what's going to happen. What are the rules in this world? If you watch well, actually, in all versions of Neverwhere, you've got humans and you've got these sort of beast men type creatures. They're fighting with swords, but they're also shooting with these kind of guns, and apparently magic works. That's the definition of like science fantasy, where all this stuff just mixes together and it is internally coherent. It makes sense in that world, even though it doesn't really make sense in any other world. And if you just sort of let go of the need to explain how all this stuff is, then it can be a pretty fun adventure. Otherwise, it can be pretty frustrating because, why do these beast men talk? What are they? If you could have a gun, why would you fight with a sword? If you have magic, why would you do this other stuff? These sort of things. But anyway, have you ever checked out Den of Neverwhere? Have you ever watched the heavy metal movie? I'm sure you can find the clips online. A lot of people like to cut up the movie and show it. But yeah, leave it in the comments. And if there's some other stories or movies or something that are based off of a movie or based off of a story, let me know. I'll see if I can fit it in. But anyway, I'll talk to you later.